everyone, it is I, Flamingo Writer here, and welcome to the first episode of Flamingo's Literary Podcast, where I talk about different types of writing from different literature. Now, before we get started, I know some of you guys are probably wondering what happened to the other video that I did on stream. I deleted it, mostly because I didn't want to see anything to deal with this and all that stuff. So that's why I literally can't stand seeing my other writing episodes though. So for those who are joining in, thank you all so much for stepping in. I really appreciate it. As well as you, Emerald, thank you for stepping in and all. But honestly though, yeah, this is gonna be a different kind of video that honestly though I'm trying my best to do my writings because I want to stay consistent with my channel, but it's also due to the fact that I myself want to also focus on writings that focus on different types of literature that I'm passionate about, whether it's due to different kinds of writings and all that. Yeah, but for the first episode, I figured that why not do something about poetry, since that's where it first got started. Let's see, hold on. Doing a script giveaway. Well, I'll keep that in mind. Thank you so much, Mandy. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, as I was saying though, yeah, we're gonna talk about poetry, and honestly though, this is actually gonna be my first episode I'll be doing something like that, so let's do this right now. Hey, Mel, nice to see you too. Okay, so poetry is something that I'm sure all of us have done a poem in our lives. If not, well, don't worry, guys. I know poems are not as easy as they look. You're talking to someone who's a writer that goes through hell with poetry. Yeah. Okay, so let's get started. When I was first going into poetries, I was really not writing a story at the time. And when it comes right down to it, though, as someone who's been writing poetries for a while, this is one that I really have to tell you guys right now. This was back then before I started doing storytelling for my writings. So when I did poetry, they were, well, I wouldn't say they were bad necessarily, they just weren't anything special. Like, I can't show you any poems that I done because there's one problem with that. I had them thrown out. Yeah, I had to throw away my poetries when I was younger, and honestly, it's really sad to say that because as someone who wants to do poems for a while though, it was really not getting anywhere, but it was also due to the fact that I didn't really have much to go with my poems. The first poem I've ever written, which I can remember the title, but I just can't remember what I've written all of it so far. So the first poem I've ever written was, fittingly enough, Flower Power, because I wanted to write something about flowers. And it's not like, say, roses are red, violets are blue. You get the gimmick. They always use that as their own gimmick for their poetry. But for me, however, I wanted to do something creative with my poems. Not something I call spectacular or anything, just something that can be more creative with that. And also due to the fact that I myself didn't have much freedom to go with my poems, that should give you an alarm bell of what my writing was. It was not that great, so to speak. It was also due to the fact that I was kind of in a not bad space, but I was in a bad timing when it comes to that. Mostly because I was a very stifled kid. I try to express my freedom, I try to express myself how I want to do my writings and all stuff like that. Just tons of stuff I would have done with my writing. But the problem with my poetry is not that I didn't have much to work with, but it's also because it wasn't really what I wanted. It was mostly due to the fact that as someone who wants to do some writings, I just thought, hey, this looks pretty good. But after a while, I start saying to myself, what did I just write? I guess I was in a headspace, which honestly I didn't know at the time though. But keep in mind, I was like 8 or 9 when I started writing poetry, and this was during the time before I started doing storytelling. And storytelling is, well, I'll get to that in another podcast maybe, because again I want to try to focus on writings materials and everything though. So for those who are stepping in, thank you for joining in on that. Yeah, but honestly though, as the poetry goes on though, it can also be due to the fact that I was just not in a good space when it comes to that though. My teachers gave me flack for putting poetry. My folks keep saying to me that, oh, you sound like you not doing anything much though with your poetry, or you're just not that good enough. Well, to be honest, that's where I wanted to give up on that. But as I grew around 9 years old, I started reading a story that actually did get me into my poetry. Now, the poetry that's in question is really a book of some sorts, known as Runny Babbitt. For those who don't know, Runny Babbitt was a story written by Silverstein. At least I hope that's how I'm pronouncing it. Can you tell my accent's bad, people? Please. Yeah, honestly, though I'm not surprised in the slightest, my poetry was something I call, well, not the worst, I say, I just didn't know what the hell I was writing at the time. And to be honest, I still felt that as time went on, though. So when it comes to Runny Babbitt poetry in the book, that's where I started realizing that, yeah, I think that's where my structure first started out. But it's more like a literary nonsense of poetry. That's what it felt like. Like, if anything, though, the poetry in of itself was, hold on, let me see if I can find a Runny Babbitt. Let's see. Yeah, something like this. Like, it's really about a bad habit of just saying things that are the opposite. Like, say, what the screen I'm showing you right now, it's, say, instead of just saying, hey, it's poetry or something like that, it's, well, I don't know how to describe it, though. It's really hard to tell what to say from my own perspective. Like, hey, let's say this, for example. Instead of just saying library, which it's hard to tell from the screen I'm showing you guys right now, so yeah, it's, instead of just saying library, he says library, like some kind of little 3-year-old would say. Yeah, call me a weird kid, and yeah, I'm not ashamed to admit, I am weird. I am so awkward and all that. But it's also worth pointing out that when doing the poetry for myself, I gotta be honest, I didn't think there was anything much with it. Thanks for stepping in, Choco, thank you very much. But it's also worth pointing out that when it gets right down to it, though, I just didn't know what the poetry I was writing was pretty much anything like that. Now again, I wouldn't say they're anything spectacular, but they were something I couldn't get into without putting more into detail. So yeah, that should come as a surprise for absolutely nobody in my audience. What's also surprising to me about the poetry that I've written, I don't recall what I've written exactly, but I do recall seeing about how flower power and something about showers. No, not the showers you take a bath in. Don't be like that. No, the showers I'm talking about were April showers, no less. That's what I was talking about. Excuse me. But it's also worth pointing out when it comes right down to it, my poetry was, well, I wouldn't say it wasn't getting me anywhere. It was just something that I just don't know whereabouts it could be at places. It's also worth pointing out when doing the poetry, it's something I don't even think I would get myself in a headspace with that, though. But it's also worth pointing out when getting older, the only time I actually got more into poetry was when I was in middle school. And at that point, I was going through a lot of writing phases. Not just with poetry, but with fables and something like fairy tales, fantasy, or something along those lines of writings. Yeah, tons of stuff I could name at the top of my head. But if I listed everything, we'd be here like about 24/7. That's how long my story would go. Yeah, I'm not going to go into detail with that, but what I am going to say, though, is that the writing itself, that's where all things started realizing that there's a lot more to it than just that, though. Like, I started realizing as I got older, the poems that I have written were usually ones that I didn't know it had, though. So I started doing things like, again, an Edgar Allan Poe. Now, for those who haven't seen the last video before I deleted it, I said that Edgar Allan Poe was actually one of my influences when I was in middle school. I was in a dark place at the time, like, mostly because I just didn't want to talk to people, I just didn't want anyone to do with me, and as such, though, it's really hard for me to describe into words about how my poetry was at times. Like, I will admit, while I was into Edgar Allan Poe, my biggest problem wasn't with Edgar Allan Poe that made me feel like that. It was the fact that I wanted to do something with like dark poetry in of itself, though. The only problem with that is that, well, as you can tell, even as a teenager, my writing still sucked. And it was still sucking more than I thought it would be, though. I think it's because during that time I had a lot of issues, especially with my ex-boyfriend at the time. yeah, I didn't really know what else I was going with for that though. So as I started seeing more and more of my uh, works, though, I started saying to myself, might as well just read poetry because that's what got into my writing in the first place as well, though. So after digging and digging, I started seeing that there was a lot of poetries of Edgar Allan Poe. Way too many for me to name. If I listed every poem I've read from this man, we'd be here all day. But simply put, he actually does have a lot of things going for it as is, though. It's even worth pointing out that he also had a lot of dark material with it, which is appropriate because after learning some history with the guy, he did have not a lot of bright light into it. Not necessarily like say he's dumb or anything, but mostly due to the fact that he just had a dark time at this time and day or whatever you call. Again, this was during the time when and you didn't really have television or anything like that. You had to occupy yourself in some other ways. But believe me, if I were there back then, oh boy, would I get killed for just writing. Yeah, I don't know if anyone knew this, but if a woman or a girl or anything that's a female individual, if they did something like reading or writing, they would get in serious trouble for that. I know, that's really what I have to say about that. Oh my god, I don't know what is it with me with dark humor. What is that? I think it has something to do with something else though. I guess I'll buy it. But yeah, apparently dark. And when it comes to Edgar Allan Poe, I think I have to fully admit though, Edgar Allan Poe's works really turned on me a lot more than I thought it would have though. And I'm gonna go to Edgar Allan Poe so I can show you guys though. So yeah, Edgar Allan Poe's poetry, while I wouldn't say they're gonna appeal to everybody, in middle school that's where I was more fascinated to him. I'm not saying I'm not fascinated him nowadays, yeah, everybody, but I'm just saying that there's just he did that would probably be way too many for me. I mean, I know my girlfriend and I, while we did do some poets at the time when it comes to Edgar Allan Poe, I mean, okay, she's not into writing poetry as much like I am though, but she is more into romance, which I'll probably get because my stupid schedule wouldn't let me do it on Valentine's Day. I do apologize for that, people. I think what got me into the poetry in of itself with poems is that it actually did show that despite being dark and gruesome at times, though, it actually does show that Edgar did have a lot of things going for him. Is though, if I had to pick a favorite poem from him, call me predictable, but I like The Raven. That in of itself really shows how much brilliance he shows in his imagery. And that's another thing too, imagery. Imagery is something that I'm sure all of us have always had in our heads though. If you don't know what imagery is, well, basically it means imagining in your own mind, like through the senses, like you can feel things, you can touch things, you can sense things by smelling or anything like that. Yeah, those kind of imagery. I mean, yeah, it's not always easy, but if you can actually do something with your imagination, you can't really go wrong with that. And if itself though, that's one thing I will say about that. But it's another thing though when it comes right down to it though, I don't think there's been a lot more poetry than I would have in the first place though. About that. Yeah, let's talk about something that's been bugging me for quite some time though. Some people saying how a poem has to rhyme. Now personally, while I do have my instincts in saying that it does rhyme, I don't think you necessarily have to make it rhyme all the time though. Like, I've learned in school that when it comes to poetry, you don't necessarily have to rhyme though. Oh sure, it does give you a sense of detail of what the person's feeling and all that. I'll give it that way. But the other thing is, poetry doesn't have to always show some rhymes. Like say, like, you know how people always say, again with that statement I said earlier, roses are red, violets are blue, or something like that, or they just come up with whatever they can out of their heads. Yeah, I mean, I will admit, yes, most poetry does rhyme. That's how we get our sense of rhyming and all that stuff out of the way, though. But the thing is, poetry doesn't really have to rhyme. Like, I don't think there's that many poetries that have to rhyme, or I don't think I've read anything that has to rhyme. But what I'm trying to say is that poetry is something that I think a lot of us have yet to be proud of in some ways, though. And let's be honest, though, if unless you're very clever and stuff like that, there are also other tons of poetries you can put out there as well, though. And let's see, you can also do things like haiku, limerick, sonnet, um, Finland, or Quain. I think what I used to do was mostly the sonnet poetry. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. If I don't, you can feel free to correct me on that. I don't really know how to pronounce it though. But yeah, given the fact that poems have shown that there's a lot to it than what meets the eye, though, it's really no wonder why poetry in of itself does show there's a lot of things you can do with it, and that's something to be proud of. I will give it that though. But that's not really what I have to say though. See, when I was a kid, even when it comes to poetry, I didn't really have a lot of freedom with my poetry. Not necessarily because I didn't have time to do it because I was going to elementary school and all that stuff, but it's mostly because as a kid, something got to me though. When it comes right down to it though. Yeah. See, when I was a kid while still doing poetry, there was a teensy problem I had. You see, this was when I was in elementary school, and keep in mind, the storytelling goes, I was not into it. I do recall writing a story about something though, but whenever I did write something about poetry, that's where all hell broke loose for me, because my teachers in my elementary days were not always kind to me. And I know what you're thinking. Not every teacher is going to be nice to you, and they're just going to show you the policies and all that other shit and stuff. But the truth is, I didn't really have much freedom with my poetry. Not necessarily because I didn't want to show off what I can do, but it's because I didn't really have a lot of teachers who didn't like it, though. They kept saying to me that I'm never going to be a good writer, I'm never going to succeed in something like that. Just tons of stuff I could just say. It's really gone to the point where I took that personally. Like, I know writing wasn't really my passion at the time, but it was something that I was kind of doing at the time when I didn't have anything else to do. Granted, I did have other stuff to do, like hang out with my friends and whatnot, and as such, go around shopping and whatever. This was before I had my job and everything. But at the same time, though, I wanted to show myself that there was more I can do for myself. Like, aside from collecting stuff and going to hang out with them and all that, I wanted to do something that was a hobby that I could do. Something that I could actually get into at times, though. Now, I do realize some people are going to say to me that poetry, or in this case, writing poetry, is not going to get you anywhere. I guess you could say that, but it got me somewhere. It got me into thinking of creativity of my imagination. I mean, sure, I'm not the most imaginative person out there, but I do encourage myself to do whatever it comes to my imagination at times, though. So yeah, I will admit that that's something that I am proud of doing, though. Consider this though, guys, I'm not saying that doing poetry is gonna help everyone out. I mean, sure, it may have helped me out on occasion, but I'm just saying that poetry in of itself is really something that, if you're someone who loves to write and do some creativity, you can't really go wrong with poetic stuff, though. Now, I'm not saying that's going to appeal to everybody, and what's more, it's not going to show everyone wants to be a poetic at times, though. But what I am saying is that, deep down, I really do hope that it does help people out on occasion, and maybe find their path of their of their own freedom. If you're not really into reading or writing, though, for yourself, that's fine. This is more of me as a Flamingo who actually wants to show and tell what I can do for you guys to be entertained by that. I know this isn't a lot to say, though, because given the fact I want to do something more with these podcast episodes, but I don't know when the next episode will be. Hopefully it won't take as long because with my schedule and everything, but I do hope and pray that for the people who are watching this, I really do appreciate those who are into my stuff, though. I know it's not anything special, but I want to just focus on my consistent writings and all that stuff. Like, show you guys what is it like to be a writer, what are the different literary stuff, though. Tons of stuff like that. Although, honestly, though, while I do admit this ain't something I call special for my podcast, I will admit I still appreciate you guys for being here, though. It shows how much I really respect and care about my fans. And honestly, though, while I will admit the next video, I'm gonna talk about something that's, well, okay, I'm gonna say this right here and now. I will talk about different users who've done something that needs to be called out, but next time I'm probably gonna be doing a video about some user that my friend Hana told me about, and it's gonna be a little heavier than I thought it would be. But until then, I hope you guys who are watching this, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all in next in the next video I'll be doing. So until then, as always, stay flamingo-tastic.